You are standing in a city that does not exist yet. The year is 1953. Where a forest of glass towers will one day stand, there is only rubble, ash, and silence. This is Seoul. 3 years of war have just ended. Almost every factory, bridge, and railway in the country has been bombed into dust. Your average income, if you lived here, would be lower than most countries in sub-Saharan Africa. You would not own a refrigerator. You would not own a car. Most years, you would not be certain there was enough rice to make it to spring. Now fast forward. Just one lifetime later, this same country builds more ships than any other nation on Earth. It manufactures the phone in your pocket, the chips inside your laptop, the car in your driveway. Its television dramas and pop songs are streamed by hundreds of millions of people who have never set foot in Asia. How does a country go from ashes to this in 40 years? Most nations that escape deep poverty take a century or more. Economists at the World Bank have called what happened here the fastest sustained economic transformation on record. So what did South Korea do that almost nobody else managed to pull off? Let's go back to the beginning. In 1960, South Korea's income per person sat below that of Ghana. 60% of the population worked the land, mostly by hand. There was no steel industry, no shipbuilding, no electronics. The country's biggest export was wigs made from human hair, sold to buyers in the United States. Then in 1961, a general named Park Chung-hee seized power in a coup. History remembers him as authoritarian, and the human cost of his rule was real. But economically, he made one decision that changed everything. Instead of protecting the country by sealing it off from the world, he bet the entire economy on exporting to it. Here is the idea in plain terms. Most poor countries at the time tried to build everything themselves, behind high tariffs, making goods only for their own citizens. Park's government did the opposite. It picked a small number of companies, gave them cheap loans and tax breaks, and told them one thing: sell abroad or lose the support. Economist Alice Amsden, who studied this period closely, called it late industrialization by discipline. The government did not just hand out money, it set export targets. Miss a target and a company lost its loans. Hit it and the support kept flowing. This is where the names you now recognize begin. Samsung started as a company trading dried fish and noodles. Hyundai began building simple trucks under contract. Under this system of pressure and reward, both were pushed to compete on a global stage far sooner than they were ready for. Picture a Hyundai engineer in 1967 sent to a foreign shipyard to learn how tankers are built. He is told to memorize everything he sees because his country cannot yet afford outside experts. Within a decade, that same company delivers its first ship. Within 2 decades, it is one of the largest shipbuilders on the planet. This did not happen by accident. It happened because the government treated education the same way it treated exports, as a national investment, not a personal luxury. In 1945, roughly 1 in 5 adults in Korea could read. By the 1980s, Korea had one of the highest literacy rates in the world, and college enrollment had exploded. Families sacrificed nearly everything to send their children to school, because for the first time, an education actually led somewhere. Sociologist Michael Seth, who has written extensively on Korean development, points to this combination as unusual. A government willing to discipline big business alongside a population willing to sacrifice consumption today for skills tomorrow. Households saved a striking share of their income throughout the 1960s and 1970s, money that banks then funneled into industry at the government's direction.
Now here is the twist that surprises most people. This growth was not gentle, and it was not fair in the way people often imagine progress should be. Wages were kept low for years, even as exports boomed. Labor unions were restricted, sometimes violently. Working days in factories often stretched past 12 hours. The very discipline that built the shipyards and steel mills also crushed dissent and controlled the press. In other words, South Korea did not get rich by being kind to its own workers in the short term. It got rich by making a brutal bet. Sacrifice comfort now for capability later. And the population, largely, went along with it, partly because they had lived through a war that made almost any peacetime hardship feel survivable by comparison. By the late 1980s, something shifted. Wealth had grown enough and workers had grown organized enough that the old bargain broke down. Massive labor strikes in 1987 forced real democratic reforms. The same industrial base that authoritarian planning had built now had to answer to labor unions, elections, and a free press. Remarkably, the economy did not collapse when democracy arrived. It kept growing, this time with a rising middle class demanding its share. Then, in 1997, the model was tested again. The Asian financial crisis hit Korea hard. Currency collapsed, unemployment spiked, and the very conglomerates the government had built up, known as Chaebols, were forced to restructure or die. Overnight, workers who had been promised lifetime employment in exchange for their sacrifice watched that promise disappear. Some of the largest chaebols collapsed entirely. Instead of retreating, Korea used the crisis to open its economy further, investing heavily in something few countries were paying attention to yet: broadband internet and semiconductors. That bet paid off. Companies like Samsung Electronics pivoted from copying foreign technology to leading global markets in memory chips and displays. Notice the pattern repeating. Every time the old system nearly broke, the country did not retreat into the past. It absorbed the shock, then bet on whatever came next. War became a reason to rebuild from nothing rather than patch what remained. Authoritarian rule became a reason to force export discipline rather than protect comfortable domestic monopolies. Financial collapse became a reason to leap into an unproven technology rather than cling only to heavy industry. Each crisis, instead of ending the story, became the hinge the next chapter turned on. So picture the full arc. A general with an iron grip on rice farmers and dock workers. A shipyard trainee memorizing blueprints he cannot yet afford to understand. A household skipping meat for a year to pay a school fee. A factory worker striking for a fair wage his father never had. An electronics company betting its future on a technology nobody else believed in yet. Each one, 40 years apart, is part of the same unbroken chain. Today, South Korea's economy is roughly 15 times larger per person than it was in 1960, according to World Bank data. It went from receiving foreign aid to becoming one of the largest aid donors in the world. It is the only country to make that full journey, from aid recipient to member of the OECD's donor club, within a single lifetime. Here is the part that mirrors back onto you. It is tempting to look at chart-topping growth like this and imagine a shortcut, some clever policy trick you could copy and paste onto any struggling economy. But the honest lesson is less comfortable. What actually happened was decades of sustained, often painful discipline, applied consistently, generation after generation, even when it was unpopular, even when it was unfair, even when the payoff was nowhere in sight yet. Most people, and most countries, want the growth without the sacrifice that produced it. South Korea is a reminder that the sacrifice usually comes first, and the growth, if it comes at all, comes decades later, to people who may never fully see the ending they helped build. You began this looking at a photograph of rubble, wondering how anyone rebuilds from that. Now you know. Not through luck, and not through a single leader's genius, but through one generation deciding, together, to build something the next generation would inherit, long after they themselves had stopped noticing the sacrifice as sacrifice at all.